Have you ever noticed that we are living in a time when leadership books are everywhere, leadership podcasts are everywhere, leadership conferences are everywhere, and yet somehow genuine leadership feels rare? We have more management tools, more performance dashboards, more productivity hacks, more motivational slogans, and still millions of employees wake up on Monday morning already counting down to Friday afternoon, quietly disengaged, silently exhausted, and secretly wondering if anyone at the top truly understands what it feels like to be human inside a high-pressure organization. So, let me ask you something powerful before we go any further. In a world obsessed with strategy, targets, and quarterly numbers, could the real crisis of modern leadership actually be a crisis of the mind? What if the problem is not a lack of intelligence, not a lack of ambition, not even a lack of technical skill, but a lack of mindfulness, a lack of selflessness, and a lack of compassion? What if the missing ingredient in today's organizations is not another management system, but a deeper level of self-leadership? And what if the leaders who truly transform teams and companies are not the loudest, not the most aggressive, not the most charismatic, but the most aware? Pause for a moment and think about this. How often are you fully present in your own life? How often do you lead conversations with true mindfulness instead of multitasking in your head while someone else is speaking? How often do you make decisions rooted in emotional intelligence rather than stress, ego, or fear? And here's an uncomfortable but necessary question. Are you leading to protect your image, or are you leading to serve a purpose-driven leadership vision that lifts everyone around you? This is the heart of the mind of the leader. Because here is the reality. There is a massive engagement problem in modern workplaces. Leaders often believe they are inspiring, motivating, and empowering their teams. Yet surveys across industries show a different story. Employees feel unseen, unheard, and uninspired. There's a painful gap between intention and impact. Leaders think they are doing great, employees think otherwise, and that gap is costing organizations billions in lost productivity, innovation, and trust. So we try to fix it the way we always do. We send managers to leadership training, we teach them negotiation skills, we teach them presentation skills, we teach them how to manage performance metrics. But let's ask the bold question. If traditional leadership training was truly working, would we still have such low levels of engagement across the workforce? Would burnout be rising? Would talented employees be quietly quitting, emotionally checking out while physically showing up? Maybe the issue isn't that leaders don't know enough. Maybe the issue is that they haven't looked inward enough. This audiobook is not about becoming a better boss. It is about becoming a better human being who leads. It introduces a powerful framework built on 3 transformative pillars: mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion, what we can call the MSC framework. These are not soft skills. They are not nice-to-have qualities. They are performance multipliers. Mindfulness strengthens focus and clarity in a world drowning in distraction. Selflessness reduces ego-driven decision-making and builds trust. Compassion fuels resilience, loyalty, and sustainable high performance. Let me ask you directly, what would change in your professional life if you mastered mindfulness and could regulate your reactions under pressure? What would happen to your relationships if selflessness replaced defensiveness and the need to be right? What would your organizational culture look like if compassion was not mistaken for weakness, but understood as courageous strength? Because here is something simple and revolutionary. You cannot lead others effectively until you can lead yourself. The journey of this book unfolds across 3 powerful levels of leadership. First, lead yourself. That means developing deep self-leadership, strengthening your emotional intelligence, managing your ego, and learning how to pause before reacting. It means understanding that your mind is either your greatest asset or your greatest liability. Second, lead your people. This is where human-centered leadership replaces outdated command and control models. It is where leaders stop treating employees like resources and start recognizing them as human beings with intrinsic motivations, personal struggles, ambitions, and dreams. It is where leaders shift from pushing performance to unlocking intrinsic motivation, because people perform best not when they are pressured, but when they feel purpose. And third, lead your organization. Because leadership does not stop at the individual level. It shapes culture, it shapes systems, it shapes what gets rewarded, what gets ignored, and what becomes normal. An organizational culture built on fear may produce short-term results, but one built on mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion creates sustainable excellence. Now, let's be honest for a second. When you hear words like compassion or selflessness, does a part of you think, that sounds nice, but will it work in the real world? That skepticism is understandable. Many people believe tough environments require tough leaders. But what if the strongest leaders are not those who dominate the room, but those who stabilize it? What if true power lies not in control, but in clarity, not in ego, but in awareness? Here is the promise of this journey. Extraordinary results do not come from external pressure, they come from inner transformation. When leaders train their minds, when they cultivate emotional intelligence, when they anchor their decisions in purpose-driven leadership, something shifts. Teams feel safe enough to innovate, employees feel seen enough to engage, organizations become resilient enough to thrive in uncertainty. And here is the beautiful twist. This transformation does not begin with changing your team, it begins with changing your mind. So as you begin this audiobook experience, I invite you to listen not just as a manager, not just as an executive, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a human being who has the power to influence others. Ask yourself, am I leading on autopilot or am I leading with intention? Am I reacting or responding? Am I building a culture of fear or a culture of trust? Am I chasing performance metrics alone or am I cultivating human-centered leadership that creates lasting engagement? Because the future of leadership will not belong to those with the loudest voice in the room. It will belong to those with the clearest mind, the humblest ego, and the most courageous heart. And that future starts now.
If you are working in the USA, in Europe, or any other part of the world, whether it is Manhattan, Silicon Valley, California, downtown Seattle, the Chicago Loop, or in London, Paris, or Frankfurt, then this audiobook belongs to you. Because no matter where you sit, corner office or cubicle, startup garage or global headquarters, one truth is universal. Leadership today feels harder than ever. Targets are higher, attention spans are shorter, inboxes are fuller, and yet engagement is lower. And Chapter 1 of The Mind of the Leader, titled The MSC Leader, introduces a radical but deeply practical idea. What if the real breakthrough in leadership does not begin with strategy, but with your mind? This chapter lays the conceptual backbone of the entire book. It challenges the modern assumption that better perks, higher bonuses, free snacks, ping-pong tables, or stock options automatically create motivated teams. Now, don't get me wrong. No one has ever resigned because the coffee machine was too good. But perks and bonuses are external motivators. They might spark short bursts of effort, but they rarely create long-term engagement. Why? Because they appeal to extrinsic motivation, the desire to gain rewards or avoid punishment. And extrinsic motivation is like caffeine. It works, but it wears off. You need more and more to get the same effect, and eventually it stops working altogether. The authors explain that long-term engagement comes from intrinsic motivation, the internal drive to contribute, to grow, to find meaning in work. Intrinsic motivation is what makes someone stay late to finish a project, not because they fear their boss, but because they care. It is what makes an employee go the extra mile for a customer, because it aligns with their values. And here's the leadership reality. Intrinsic motivation cannot be forced. It must be unlocked. And it is unlocked not by pressure, but by the quality of leadership. So what defines extraordinary leaders? The chapter introduces 3 core qualities: mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion, together forming the MSC model. Let's begin with mindfulness. In leadership, mindfulness is not about sitting cross-legged in a quiet room chanting. It is about focus and clarity. It is about being fully present in a meeting instead of secretly checking your email under the table. It is about noticing your emotional reactions before they spill out into the room. Think about the last time you reacted too quickly in a tense conversation. Maybe someone challenged your idea, and before you even realized it, you were defending yourself like a lawyer in a courtroom drama. Mindfulness creates a pause between stimulus and response. That pause is where leadership lives. Research in neuroscience shows that when leaders strengthen mindful awareness, they activate higher-level executive functioning in the brain, leading to better decisions, clearer thinking, and reduced emotional reactivity. In practical terms, that means fewer regretful emails and more thoughtful conversations. Next is selflessness. And no, this does not mean becoming a doormat or losing confidence. Selflessness in leadership is about managing the ego. It is recognizing that leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room, but about creating the smartest room possible. Ego-driven leadership focuses on protecting image, status, and control. Selfless leadership focuses on collective success. When leaders shift from "how do I look" to "how can we win together," trust rises, innovation rises, collaboration rises. In practical terms, this means giving credit publicly, listening more than speaking, and being willing to admit when you do not have all the answers. Ironically, the moment a leader says, "I don't know, what do you think?" is often the moment their team respects them more, not less. Then comes compassion. And here is where many leaders misunderstand the concept. Compassion is not softness. It is not lowering standards. It is not avoiding tough decisions. Compassion is wise care. It is understanding people's struggles while still holding them accountable. It is recognizing that behind every job title is a human being with challenges, pressures, and aspirations. Compassionate leadership creates psychological safety, which research consistently links to higher performance and innovation. When people feel safe, they speak up. When they speak up, better ideas surface. When better ideas surface, organizations thrive. The MSC Leadership Matrix introduced in this chapter combines these three qualities. Mindfulness without compassion can become cold and detached. Compassion without selflessness can become burnout. Selflessness without mindfulness can become self-neglect. But when all three work together, they create balanced, sustainable leadership. It's like a three-legged stool. Remove one leg, and stability disappears. Now here is the powerful shift this chapter makes. Leadership starts with being human first. Before you manage performance, you must manage yourself. Before you influence culture, you must influence your own mind. The chapter makes it clear that the future of leadership is not about doing more, it is about being more aware. Practically, what does this mean for someone listening right now? It means starting your day with intention instead of reaction. It means taking 60 seconds before an important meeting to breathe and center your focus. It means asking yourself, am I speaking to prove something or to improve something? It means checking your ego when feedback stings. It means remembering that people are not machines responding to incentives. They are humans responding to meaning. And here is the empowering truth. These qualities are trainable. You are not born with a fixed leadership capacity. Neuroscience confirms that the brain changes with practice. Focus can be strengthened. Emotional regulation can be improved. Empathy can be developed. The MSC leader is not a personality type. It is a disciplined practice. So, if you feel overwhelmed by modern leadership demands, this chapter does not ask you to become superhuman. It invites you to become more deeply human, and that might be the most powerful leadership strategy of all. Because when you lead with mindfulness, manage your ego with selflessness, and act with wise compassion, you do more than hit targets. You build trust, unlock engagement, and create environments where people want to give their best. And that's where extraordinary results begin. Not with perks, not with pressure, but with the mind of the leader.
Chapter 2 of The Mind of the Leader, titled Understand Yourself, is where leadership stops being a theory and becomes a mirror. And that mirror can change everything. This chapter is not about improving your resume. It is about improving your awareness. It begins with a simple but uncomfortable truth. Most leaders believe they know themselves, but very few actually observe themselves. There's a huge difference between self-awareness and self-assessment. Self-assessment is when you say, "I'm good under pressure," or "I'm not a patient person," or "I'm just direct." It is a label. Self-awareness is when you notice in real time that your heart rate just increased during a meeting, your jaw tightened when someone challenged you, and your tone shifted slightly sharper than you intended. One is a description, the other is observation. And leadership transformation begins with observation. The authors challenge the illusion that we are fully in control of our minds. We like to believe we think before we act, but neuroscience tells a different story. Much of our behavior is driven by automatic patterns stored in the brain, habits, biases, emotional triggers built over years. In leadership, this shows up as autopilot behavior. You walk into a meeting already assuming who will agree and who will resist. You receive critical feedback and instantly defend yourself before fully listening. You check your phone in the middle of a conversation without even realizing you reached for it. Autopilot is efficient, but it is not always intelligent. Think about driving home from work. Have you ever arrived in your driveway and barely remembered the last 10 minutes of the trip? That is autopilot. Now imagine leading your team on autopilot. Same body, same words, but reduced awareness. That is where misunderstandings grow, trust erodes, and culture slowly weakens. The chapter goes deeper into how thoughts create reality, not in a mystical way, but in a neurological and psychological way. The brain constantly interprets situations through mental stories. If a team member misses a deadline, one leader might think they don't care. Another might think they're overwhelmed. The external event is the same. The internal interpretation shapes the emotional reaction, and that emotional reaction shapes behavior. Thoughts create emotional states. Emotional states influence decisions. Decisions shape culture. So in a very real sense, your thinking patterns shape your leadership outcomes. Here is the transformational shift. You are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, but you are not defined by them. This sounds simple, but it is revolutionary. When a thought arises like, "I'm not good enough for this role," or "this employee is impossible," that thought feels real. It feels factual, but awareness allows you to step back and say, that is a thought, not a truth. This separation creates freedom. Without awareness, thoughts control you. With awareness, you can choose which thoughts to believe and which to let go. The authors introduce neuroplasticity to reinforce this hope. The brain is not fixed, it is adaptable. Every time you practice awareness instead of reaction, you strengthen new neural pathways. Every time you pause before responding in anger, you literally reshape your brain's circuitry. Leadership, therefore, is not about personality, it is about practice. You are not stuck with your default settings. You can upgrade them. One of the most powerful ideas in this chapter is the 1-second gap. Between stimulus and response, there is a tiny space. It might be less than a second, but it exists. In that space, you can either react automatically or respond consciously. That 1-second gap is the birthplace of mindful leadership. Imagine you receive an email that feels critical. Autopilot says, fire back immediately. Awareness says, pause, breathe, read it again. That pause changes everything. It protects relationships. It prevents regret. It builds trust. In practical terms, this chapter invites leaders to develop simple but powerful habits. Start by observing your emotional triggers. Notice what situations consistently frustrate you. Is it missed deadlines? Is it being interrupted? Is it lack of recognition? Instead of judging yourself for these reactions, simply observe them. Awareness without judgment is the first step. Another practical tool is daily reflection. At the end of each day, ask yourself, when was I on autopilot today? When was I fully present? This question builds the muscle of noticing. Over time, you begin catching yourself in the moment rather than after the damage is done. Breathing practices also strengthen the 1-second gap. It doesn't require an hour of meditation. Even 3 conscious breaths before entering a meeting can shift your nervous system from reactive to responsive. That small shift improves clarity and emotional regulation. And let's be honest, sometimes leadership feels like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Pressure is real, deadlines are real, expectations are real, but so is your capacity to grow.
The authors emphasize that self-awareness is not self-criticism, it is self-understanding. The goal is not to judge yourself harshly for mistakes. The goal is to see clearly so you can improve intentionally. When you understand yourself, you reduce the gap between intention and impact. You become less defensive and more curious. You respond instead of react. You create environments where others feel safe to do the same. Self-awareness becomes contagious. This chapter is a mental awakening because it shifts leadership from external control to internal mastery. You cannot control every market shift, every competitor, or every employee decision, but you can train your mind. And when you train your mind, you influence everything else more effectively. So as you continue this journey, remember that the strongest leaders are not those who suppress emotion or pretend to be perfect. They are those who understand their inner world deeply enough to manage it wisely. The 1-second gap is always there. The question is whether you will use it. And the empowering truth is this: you are not stuck. Your brain can change. Your habits can change. Your leadership can evolve. The moment you begin to observe yourself with honesty and courage is the moment your transformation begins.
Whether you are leading a startup in Austin, running operations in New York City, managing engineers in Silicon Valley, overseeing healthcare teams in Chicago, or directing projects in London or Berlin, the challenge is the same. Your attention is under attack. And Chapter 3 of The Mind of the Leader, Mindfully Lead Yourself, makes a bold claim that feels almost too simple to be revolutionary. Your ability to focus is your most valuable leadership asset. Not your IQ, not your title, not even your experience. Your focus. This chapter is about practical focus mastery. It begins by clarifying something most of us misunderstand. Focus and awareness are not the same thing, but they work together. Focus is the ability to place your attention on a chosen object, an email, a strategy discussion, a performance review, and keep it there. Awareness is the ability to notice where your attention actually is. Focus directs the spotlight. Awareness tells you when the spotlight has drifted. Without awareness, you do not even realize you are distracted. Without focus, you cannot sustain performance. Now here's the uncomfortable reality. The modern workplace is engineered for distraction. Notifications, instant messages, breaking news alerts, calendar reminders, social media pings. Your brain is constantly being pulled in multiple directions. Studies show that every time you switch tasks, your brain pays a cognitive cost. It takes time to reorient. Multiply that by dozens of interruptions a day, and you are not just losing minutes, you're losing depth, and leadership requires depth. Imagine trying to have a meaningful conversation with a team member while glancing at your phone every 30 seconds. Even if you think you are listening, they feel the split attention. Presence is sensed. Distraction is sensed, and trust quietly adjusts itself based on what people feel from you. The chapter explains that distraction is not just about productivity. It's about emotional regulation. When your attention is scattered, your stress levels rise. When stress rises, your reactivity increases. This is where neuroscience becomes powerful. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, decision-making, impulse control, and strategic thinking, operates best when you are calm and focused. But when you're overwhelmed, the brain shifts into more primitive survival responses. You become reactive instead of reflective. Think about the last time you were overloaded with emails, deadlines, and back-to-back meetings. Someone asked a simple question and you snapped. Not because the question was unreasonable, but because your cognitive bandwidth was already maxed out. That's not a character flaw. It's brain science. But here's the empowering part. Mindfulness strengthens the prefrontal cortex. Regular mindful attention training increases your capacity for executive function. In simple terms, it helps you stay intelligent under pressure. Mindfulness in this chapter is described very practically. It's the deliberate practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It can be as simple as noticing your breath for 1 minute. It can be as direct as fully listening to someone without preparing your response while they are speaking. It's not about escaping work. It's about enhancing how you engage with it. The cost of distraction in leadership is enormous. It reduces creativity because innovation requires sustained attention. It weakens relationships because people feel unseen. It increases mistakes because your brain misses details. And perhaps most importantly, it drains energy. Constant task switching exhausts the mind more than deep, focused work. So how do you increase focus in a world designed to fragment it? The chapter offers practical methods. One is single tasking. Instead of answering emails during meetings or switching between 5 browser tabs, commit to one task at a time for a defined period. Even 20 minutes of uninterrupted work can dramatically improve output quality. Another strategy is mindful transitions. Before moving from one meeting to another, pause for 30 seconds. Take 3 slow breaths. Ask yourself what matters most in the next conversation. This small reset strengthens awareness and prevents emotional spillover from one interaction into the next. Digital boundaries are also essential. Turn off non-essential notifications. Schedule specific times to check email, rather than responding instantly. Leaders often believe constant availability equals effectiveness, but constant interruption equals diminished performance. Emotional regulation is strengthened through simple awareness practices. When you feel frustration rising, instead of suppressing it or expressing it impulsively, notice it. Label it silently. Frustration. Neuroscience shows that labeling emotions reduces their intensity by activating the prefrontal cortex. That tiny act of naming your emotion can prevent unnecessary conflict. And then there's presence, which the authors describe as a leadership superpower. Presence is when someone feels that in that moment, they matter to you. It doesn't require hours. It requires undivided attention. When a leader is fully present, conversations become clearer. Feedback becomes more constructive, and alignment becomes easier. People are more likely to follow leaders who make them feel seen. Think about the leaders who have impacted you most. Chances are they were not the most distracted. They were the ones who looked you in the eye, listened carefully, and responded thoughtfully. That's presence, and it's trainable. This chapter does not suggest you eliminate all distractions forever. That would require living in a cabin in the mountains with no Wi-Fi. Instead, it suggests you reclaim intentional control over your attention. Attention is your currency. Where you invest it determines your return. When you mindfully lead yourself, you increase clarity, reduce unnecessary stress, and make higher quality decisions. You become less reactive and more strategic. You stop confusing busyness with effectiveness, and you discover that focus is not restrictive, it's liberating. The empowering message at the end of this chapter is simple but profound. You do not need more hours in your day. You need more presence in your hours. The leader who masters attention masters performance. And when you strengthen your focus, you strengthen your impact on every person and every result connected to you. Your mind is either scattered or directed. The choice and the training are in your hands.
In every boardroom in Boston, every tech campus in Silicon Valley, every hospital in Houston, every finance office in New York, and every growing startup across the world, there is one invisible force shaping decisions more than strategy, more than data, and sometimes more than values. And that force is ego. Chapter 4 of The Mind of the Leader, Selfless Self-Leadership, takes us into one of the most uncomfortable but transformative areas of leadership development, ego management. Not ego elimination, not self-doubt, but ego awareness and regulation. Let's begin with an honest truth. Ego is not evil. Without ego, you would not have ambition.
You would not apply for the promotion. You would not pitch the bold idea. Healthy self-confidence is necessary for leadership. The problem is not having an ego. The problem is when the ego starts driving the vehicle instead of sitting quietly in the passenger seat. The chapter explains how ego becomes one of the primary causes of leadership derailment. Leaders rarely fail because of a lack of intelligence. They fail because of defensiveness, arrogance, the inability to receive feedback, or the need to always be right. Think about how many organizations suffer not from poor strategy, but from leaders who refuse to admit mistakes. Ego turns learning moments into blame games. It turns collaboration into competition. It turns feedback into personal attacks. Here is where the distinction becomes critical: self-confidence versus selfishness. Self-confidence says, "I believe in my ability to learn and figure this out." Selfishness says, "I must prove I am superior." Self-confidence invites input. Selfishness shuts it down. One builds trust, the other erodes it. And the tricky part? On the surface, they can look similar. Both speak assertively, both take initiative, but the internal motivation is different. Self-confidence is rooted in purpose. Selfishness is rooted in insecurity. The authors introduce what can be understood as a humility matrix, a framework that balances confidence and humility. On one axis, you have strength and decisiveness. On the other, openness and vulnerability. If you have strength without humility, you become domineering. If you have humility without strength, you become passive. But when both are present, you become a grounded leader. Clear in direction, open to feedback, strong yet approachable. Think about a leader who says, "Here's the direction we're going, and I want your honest input before we finalize." That sentence alone communicates both confidence and humility. It says, "I can lead," and "I don't know everything." That balance is powerful. Getting out of your own way is a recurring theme in this chapter. Often, the biggest obstacle to effective leadership is not external competition, it is internal attachment. Attachment to being right, attachment to recognition, attachment to control. When leaders cling too tightly to their ideas, they miss better ones. When they cling to their image, they avoid necessary risks. When they cling to control, they suffocate initiative in others. Let's make this practical. Imagine a team member proposes an idea that challenges your original plan. Your immediate reaction might be subtle but defensive. Maybe you interrupt. Maybe you explain why your approach is safer. Maybe you dismiss the suggestion quickly. That is ego protecting territory. But selfless self-leadership would pause and ask, what if this idea improves ours? That small shift can unlock innovation. The chapter also addresses the difference between long-term leadership and short-term dominance. Short-term dominance might win an argument. It might secure compliance. It might even produce immediate results. But long-term leadership builds loyalty, engagement, and sustainable performance. Dominance says, "Do it because I said so." Leadership says, "Let's align on why this matters." Research consistently shows that leaders who operate from ego-driven control create environments of fear. People may comply, but they will not commit. They may follow instructions, but they will not bring their best ideas. Over time, talent leaves, creativity declines, culture weakens. On the other hand, leaders who manage their ego create psychological safety. When people are not afraid of humiliation or dismissal, they contribute more openly. And ironically, the leader who does not need constant validation often earns the most respect. So how do you practice selfless self-leadership in real life? It starts with awareness of your triggers. Notice when you feel the urge to defend yourself. Notice when you crave recognition. Notice when criticism feels like a threat rather than information. Instead of suppressing these reactions, observe them. That observation weakens ego's automatic grip. Another practice is intentional credit giving. Publicly acknowledge your team's contributions. Share the spotlight. This does not diminish your authority, it strengthens it. People trust leaders who elevate others. Feedback is another powerful tool. Ask your team, what is one thing I could do better as a leader? And then listen without interrupting. That moment requires courage, but it is one of the fastest ways to grow beyond ego. Humor helps too. Sometimes the healthiest thing a leader can do is laugh at their own mistakes. When you can say, well, that idea clearly needed more coffee, You humanize yourself. Perfection is intimidating. Authenticity is inspiring. The grounding message of this chapter is not that you must shrink yourself. It is that you must see yourself clearly. Selfless self-leadership is not about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking of yourself less often. When your focus shifts from self-protection to collective success, your leadership matures. And here is the empowering truth. Ego management is not a one-time achievement, it's a daily discipline. Every meeting offers a choice. Every disagreement offers a choice. Every success offers a choice. Do you inflate or do you appreciate? Do you dominate or do you develop others? When you learn to lead beyond ego, you unlock a deeper level of influence. You stop exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth. You begin building something larger than your image. And that's where long-term leadership lives, not in loud authority, but in quiet strength. The strongest leaders are not those who win every argument. They are those who build environments where the best ideas win. And when you get out of your own way, you create space for extraordinary things to happen, not just for you, but for everyone you lead.
Picture a leader closing their laptop at the end of a 14-hour day in Atlanta, Toronto, San Francisco, or London, mentally replaying every conversation, every mistake, every sentence they wish they had phrased better, and instead of resting, their inner voice begins its nightly performance review, whispering, "You should have done more. You should be better. You cannot slow down now." Chapter 5 of The Mind of the Leader, titled Lead Yourself with Compassion, gently but powerfully interrupts that voice and introduces one of the most misunderstood strengths in leadership: self-compassion. This chapter centers on internal emotional balance. Because here's the truth many high performers do not want to admit: leaders are often far harder on themselves than anyone else could ever be. We believe self-criticism keeps us sharp. We assume that if we loosen the pressure, performance will drop. We equate kindness with weakness. But the research and the lived experience of sustainable leaders tell a different story. The chapter begins by distinguishing self-compassion from self-indulgence. Self-compassion is not making excuses. It is not lowering standards. It is not saying, "Oh well, it doesn't matter." It is the ability to treat yourself with the same fairness and understanding that you would offer a respected colleague. If a team member made a mistake, you would likely say, "What can we learn from this?" Yet when you make a mistake, your internal dialogue might say, "How could you mess that up?" That difference matters. Self-criticism activates the threat system in the brain. When you repeatedly attack yourself internally, your body responds with stress. Cortisol rises, tension builds. Over time, that inner pressure becomes burnout. And burnout is not just about working long hours. It's about chronic emotional strain without recovery. Leaders often push through exhaustion because they believe resilience means enduring constant pressure. But resilience actually requires recovery. The authors highlight that burnout is frequently fueled by internal expectations rather than external demands. Yes, the workload may be heavy, but the voice saying you are never doing enough amplifies the weight. Without self-compassion, leaders operate in a constant state of inner judgment, and that drains energy faster than any calendar ever could. Now, let's address a common fear. If I become compassionate with myself, won't I become lazy? This is where discipline versus harshness becomes important. Discipline is structured commitment to growth. Harshness is emotional punishment for imperfection. You can maintain high standards without attacking your own worth. In fact, studies show that people who practice self-compassion are more likely to take responsibility for mistakes because they are not paralyzed by shame. Imagine finishing a major presentation that did not land as strongly as you hoped. Harshness says, "You failed. You're not cut out for this." Discipline with compassion says, "That didn't go as planned. Let's review what worked and improve the rest." One shuts down learning, the other fuels it. Compassion as strength is one of the most transformative ideas in this chapter. We often associate strength with endurance, stoicism, emotional suppression, but real strength is the ability to remain steady without becoming rigid. Compassion stabilizes you. It prevents emotional overreaction. It creates space between mistake and identity. Think about elite athletes. The best performers are not those who scream at themselves after every error. They reset, they refocus, they maintain composure. Leadership works the same way.
When you are kind to yourself in moments of difficulty, you preserve cognitive resources, you maintain clarity, you recover faster. The chapter also explores how self-compassion strengthens resilience. Resilience is not the absence of stress, it is the ability to return to balance after stress. When leaders practice self-compassion, they reduce rumination. Instead of replaying a difficult conversation all night, they acknowledge it, extract the lesson, and let it go. That ability to release is powerful. Practically, how do you lead yourself with compassion? It begins with noticing your inner dialogue. Throughout the day, pay attention to how you speak to yourself after mistakes or setbacks. Would you speak that way to a colleague you respect? If not, adjust the tone. Replace "I'm terrible at this" with "I'm still learning this." It may sound subtle, but language shapes emotion. Another practice is self-check-ins during high-pressure moments. Pause and ask, what do I need right now? Maybe it's a short walk. Maybe it's a glass of water before responding to an email. Compassion includes meeting basic human needs rather than ignoring them in the name of productivity. It's also helpful to normalize struggle. Every leader, no matter how composed they appear, faces doubt, fatigue, and setbacks. Recognizing that imperfection is part of the shared human experience reduces isolation. You are not uniquely flawed because you feel overwhelmed sometimes. You are human. Humor can be surprisingly restorative as well. When a project goes sideways, instead of spiraling into self-blame, sometimes it helps to smile and say, well, that was an advanced level lesson. Lightness doesn't erase responsibility, it reduces unnecessary suffering. The calm message of this chapter is that leadership is a long journey. If you treat yourself like an enemy along the way, the journey becomes exhausting. If you treat yourself like a trusted partner in growth, the journey becomes sustainable. When you lead yourself with compassion, you do not lower your standards, you strengthen your foundation. You create emotional stability that allows you to handle pressure without collapsing under it. You become more patient with others because you are no longer fighting yourself internally. And here's the uplifting truth. Kindness towards yourself expands your capacity to lead others wisely. A leader who is constantly self-critical often projects that criticism outward. A leader who is balanced internally radiates steadiness externally. So the next time you close your laptop after a long day, instead of beginning a harsh internal review, try something different. Acknowledge the effort. Recognize what went well. Identify one improvement. Then allow yourself to rest. Sustainable leadership is not built on relentless self-judgment. It's built on disciplined growth supported by compassion. In the end, the leader who can stand firmly while treating themselves with humanity becomes not only more resilient, but more powerful. And that is strength that lasts.
Step into any office tower in New York, any innovation hub in San Jose, any manufacturing plant in Ohio, or any global headquarters in London, and you will see people moving quickly, answering emails, sitting in meetings, managing deadlines. And on the surface, it all looks productive. But Chapter 6 of The Mind of the Leader, Understand Your People, asks a deeper question. Are your people merely working, or are they truly engaged? Because there is a massive difference between compliance and commitment, and this chapter marks a turning point in the book, from focusing on mastering yourself to truly understanding the human beings you lead. For years, many organizations have operated on a task-first mindset. Hit the target, close the deal, deliver the project, meet the metric. But this chapter makes it clear that sustainable performance is human-driven. If you focus only on tasks, you may get short-term results. If you focus on people, you unlock long-term excellence. So what truly motivates people? It is not just salary. It is not just bonuses. Yes, fair compensation matters, but research across psychology and organizational science consistently shows that what drives engagement is meaning, belonging, and contribution. People want to know that their work matters. They want to feel that they are part of something larger than themselves, and they want to see how their effort contributes to a shared goal. Think about the difference between telling a team member, "Finish this report by Friday," and saying, "This report will help our client make a decision that impacts 5,000 employees." The task is the same. The meaning is different. Meaning transforms obligation into purpose. Belonging is equally powerful. Human beings are wired for connection. When people feel excluded, ignored, or undervalued, their motivation declines. Not because they are lazy,
but because social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. That means when a leader dismisses someone's input or consistently interrupts them, it is not just a minor irritation. It can quietly erode engagement. Contribution completes the triangle. People want to feel useful. They want their skills recognized. They want to know that their voice counts. When leaders create environments where input is welcomed and ideas are considered, contribution rises. When decisions are made behind closed doors without transparency, contribution shrinks. This leads directly into the concept of psychological safety. Psychological safety means that people feel safe to speak up, admit mistakes, ask questions, and challenge ideas without fear of humiliation or punishment. Teams with high psychological safety consistently outperform those without it, because innovation requires risk, and risk requires safety. Now here is where the chapter becomes deeply practical and slightly humbling. Leaders often unintentionally disengage their teams, not through cruelty, but through habits. For example, multitasking during conversations. Checking your phone while someone is speaking signals that what they are saying is not fully important. Interrupting, even with good intentions, communicates that your perspective matters more. Publicly criticizing instead of privately coaching creates defensiveness rather than growth. Sometimes disengagement happens through over-control. When leaders micromanage every detail, they may believe they are ensuring quality, but what they are also communicating is a lack of trust. And when trust declines, initiative declines. People stop thinking creatively and start thinking defensively. Listening emerges as one of the most powerful leadership skills in this chapter. Not surface listening, but deep listening. Deep listening means giving someone your full attention, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting back what you heard. It means listening not only for content, but for emotion. When someone says, "I'm overwhelmed," a task-focused leader might respond with, "Here's how to prioritize." A human-focused leader might first say, "It sounds like you're carrying a lot right now." That acknowledgement alone can reduce stress. Listening is leadership because it builds trust, and trust is the foundation of engagement. When people feel heard, they feel valued. When they feel valued, they invest more energy into their work. Let's bring this into everyday leadership. During your next one-on-one meeting, instead of starting with updates and deadlines, start with a simple question. What's been energizing you lately? What's been draining you? That small shift moves the conversation from tasks to people. It opens space for insight. It signals care. Another practical approach is connecting work to purpose consistently. Do not assume your team automatically sees the bigger picture. Explain how their efforts contribute to customers, communities, or the organization's mission. Repetition of purpose builds alignment. You can also create psychological safety by modeling vulnerability. Admit when you don't have all the answers. Acknowledge your own mistakes. When leaders normalize imperfection, others feel safer taking risks. And here's something subtle but powerful. Learn people's strengths and use them intentionally. When you assign work aligned with someone's natural abilities, engagement rises naturally. When work constantly conflicts with someone's strengths, frustration grows. The insightful message of this chapter is that leadership is relational before it is operational. Results flow through relationships. Culture is built through daily interactions. And understanding your people requires curiosity. It requires slowing down enough to notice who they are beyond their job descriptions. At the end of the day, people don't leave companies. They often leave leaders. But they also stay because of leaders. They stay because they feel respected. They stay because their work feels meaningful. They stay because someone listened. When you shift from task focus to human focus, you don't lose performance, you enhance it. Because engaged people outperform managed people. Trusted people outperform controlled people. Heard people outperform ignored people. And the empowering truth is this: you don't need a bigger budget to understand your people. You need attention. You need curiosity. You need presence. When you see your team as human beings first and employees second, you build something far more powerful than productivity. You build loyalty, creativity, and shared purpose. That's leadership that lasts.
Walk into any team meeting in Denver, Boston, Los Angeles, Toronto, or Singapore, and you will likely see a familiar scene. Laptops open, phones face down but lighting up every few seconds, someone speaking while 3 people are mentally drafting their response instead of actually listening, and everyone nodding just enough to appear engaged. Now imagine the opposite.
Imagine a room where when one person speaks, others are fully present, where reactions are thoughtful instead of impulsive, where disagreements feel constructive rather than personal. Chapter 7 of The Mind of the Leader, Mindful Leadership, is about creating that second room. It is about presence in relationships. Mindful leadership moves beyond personal focus mastery and into relational awareness. It asks a simple but profound question. When you are with someone, are you truly with them? Because in leadership, attention is not just cognitive, it is emotional currency. Where you place your attention signals what you value, and people can feel the difference instantly. The chapter begins with deep listening. Not polite listening, not strategic listening, deep listening. Means suspending your internal commentary long enough to fully absorb what someone is saying. Most of us listen with the intent to respond. Mindful leaders listen with the intent to understand. That subtle shift transforms conversations. When you stop rehearsing your reply while someone is speaking, you begin noticing tone, emotion, hesitation, even what is not being said. Think about a time when you felt completely heard. Chances are the other person maintained eye contact, asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and did not interrupt. That experience builds trust almost immediately. Now think about a time when someone kept checking their phone while you were talking. The message was clear, even if unspoken. Something else is more important than you right now. Attention equals respect. This chapter emphasizes that attention is one of the most powerful forms of respect a leader can offer. In a distracted world, presence feels rare, and rarity increases value. When a leader gives undivided attention, it communicates importance, safety, and validation, and that directly strengthens engagement. But mindful leadership is not just about listening, it's also about managing your reactions in conversations. Conversations often trigger emotions, defensiveness, frustration, impatience. When someone challenges your idea in a meeting, your body reacts before your mind catches up. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, the impulse to interrupt appears. Mindful leadership means noticing that reaction without immediately acting on it. There's a critical pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, you can choose curiosity over defensiveness. Instead of saying, "That won't work," you might say, "Tell me more about your thinking." That one sentence keeps dialogue open instead of shutting it down. Reducing bias is another key component discussed in this chapter. Every leader carries unconscious biases, preferences shaped by past experiences, cultural conditioning, personal history. Bias influences hiring decisions, performance evaluations, and daily interactions. Mindfulness increases awareness of these automatic patterns. When you notice yourself consistently agreeing with people who think like you and dismissing those who think differently, that's data. Not something to feel ashamed of, but something to examine. Reducing bias requires slowing down decision-making just enough to question your assumptions. Ask yourself, am I evaluating this idea objectively, or am I reacting to who presented it? That moment of reflection can dramatically improve fairness and inclusion within teams. Creating clarity in teams is another outcome of mindful leadership. When leaders are distracted or reactive, communication becomes fragmented. Mixed messages spread confusion. But when leaders are present and intentional, clarity increases. Clear expectations, clear feedback, clear direction, all of these require focused attention. Clarity also comes from checking understanding rather than assuming it. Instead of ending a meeting with, "Okay, we're all aligned," a mindful leader might say, "Let's summarize our next steps to ensure we're on the same page." It takes an extra minute, but it prevents hours of misalignment later. Practically, how do you cultivate mindful leadership in daily interactions? Start with small commitments. In your next conversation, put your phone out of sight. Not face down, out of sight. Make eye contact. Notice your breathing. When the other person finishes speaking, pause for a second before responding. That pause demonstrates thoughtfulness. During conflict, practice labeling your internal reaction silently. If you feel irritated, mentally note irritation. Research shows that labeling emotions reduces their intensity. This simple awareness can prevent escalation. Another practice is intentional meeting openings. Begin with a moment of focus. Even 10 seconds of silence before a meeting allows everyone to settle. It may feel unusual at first, but it recalibrates attention.
And let's be honest, sometimes conversations go off track. Someone rambles, someone dominates. Mindful leadership does not mean passivity. It means redirecting with respect.
There is a quiet power in leadership that does not announce itself, does not demand applause, and does not need to dominate the room to feel significant. And Chapter 8 of The Mind of the Leader, Selfless Leadership, invites us into that higher form of influence, where the goal is no longer to be the star of the show, but to build a stage where others can shine. Because the ultimate measure of leadership is not how brightly you shine, but how many others shine because of you. In many corporate environments, from high-rise offices in Manhattan to tech campuses in Silicon Valley to consulting firms in Chicago, leadership is often unconsciously associated with visibility, authority, and recognition, promotions, titles, corner offices, keynote speeches. And while there is nothing wrong with recognition, this chapter gently but firmly challenges the assumption that leadership is about personal elevation. Instead, it reframes leadership as service. Selfless leadership begins with enabling others to shine. That means intentionally creating space for others to contribute, to grow, and to be recognized. Think about a team presentation. A self-focused leader might subtly dominate the conversation, answer every question, and take credit for the strategy. A selfless leader, on the other hand, might say, "Sarah led the research on this," or "Jamal developed the framework you're seeing here." It seems simple, but publicly acknowledging contributions sends a powerful message. You matter here. Enabling others to shine is not about stepping back permanently. It is about stepping back strategically. It requires confidence. Ironically, insecure leaders struggle with selflessness because they fear losing status. But strong leaders understand that empowering others actually strengthens their own leadership position. Passing credit is a practical expression of this mindset. In many organizations, recognition flows upward. Success gets attributed to leadership. But when leaders consistently redirect praise toward their teams, trust grows. People feel seen. And something remarkable happens. Motivation increases. Imagine completing a high-pressure project. The CEO thanks your manager, and your manager says the team deserves the credit. That moment stays with you. It builds loyalty far more effectively than a bonus alone. Of course, ego barriers are real. The human ego seeks validation. It wants to be right. It wants to win arguments. It wants acknowledgement. And leadership positions amplify that temptation. The higher the role, the greater the risk of ego-driven behavior. Removing ego barriers does not mean suppressing your personality or denying your achievements. It means noticing when the need to be right overrides the need to be effective. It means asking, is this about the best outcome for the organization or about protecting my image? For example, imagine a junior team member challenges your proposal in a meeting. The ego reacts quickly, defend, dismiss, dominate. Selfless leader pauses and considers, could they be right? Even if they are only partially right, exploring their idea strengthens collaboration. Humility is central here. Not self-deprecation, not weakness. True humility is accurate self-awareness. It recognizes strengths without exaggeration and acknowledges limitations without shame. Humble leaders are open to feedback because they don't see feedback as a threat to identity. Building trust through humility is one of the most powerful leadership moves you can make. When a leader admits, "I don't know," it signals authenticity. When a leader says, "I made a mistake," it normalizes learning. Teams led by humble leaders are more willing to speak up because they don't fear perfectionism. And let's be honest, no one enjoys working for someone who believes they are always the smartest person in the room. That dynamic shuts down creativity. It narrows perspective. It reduces innovation. But when leaders create an environment where ideas matter more than hierarchy, energy shifts. This is how empowerment culture begins. Empowerment is not a motivational poster on a wall. It is a daily pattern of behavior where authority is shared, input is valued, and growth is encouraged. In an empowerment culture, leaders delegate not just tasks, but ownership. They allow people to make decisions, even if those decisions are not exactly how the leader would have done it. That can feel uncomfortable. It requires trust. It requires letting go of control. But micromanagement suffocates development. When leaders hold too tightly, teams shrink. When leaders trust, teams expand.
Practically, selfless leadership can be developed through intentional habits. In your next team meeting, notice how often you speak compared to others. Aim to speak last instead of first. When someone succeeds, recognize them publicly. When something goes wrong, absorb responsibility as a leader instead of shifting blame downward. Another powerful practice is asking empowering questions instead of giving immediate solutions. Instead of saying, "Here's what you should do," try asking, "What options do you see?" That small shift builds confidence in others. And here's the noble truth of this chapter. Service-based leadership creates legacy. Dominant leadership may produce short-term compliance, but selfless leadership builds long-term commitment. It cultivates future leaders. When you pass credit, you grow confidence in others. When you remove ego barriers, you open space for innovation. When you build trust through humility, you create safety. And when you empower people, you multiply impact. At the end of the day, leadership is not about being remembered as the most powerful person in the room. It's about being remembered as the person who helped others discover their power. Selfless leadership is not smaller leadership. It is greater leadership. It is influence without ego, authority without arrogance, strength without intimidation. And when you choose service over status, you do not diminish your impact. You expand it, because the leaders who serve are the leaders who endure.
There comes a moment in every leader's journey when competence is no longer enough, when strategy and execution alone cannot solve what stands in front of you, when someone on your team is struggling, when performance is declining, when hard decisions must be made. And in those moments, Chapter 9 of The Mind of the Leader, Compassionate Leadership, steps in with a powerful truth. Real leadership is not just about driving results. It is about caring with wisdom. Compassionate leadership is often misunderstood. Many people confuse compassion with empathy, and while they are connected, they are not the same. Empathy is feeling with someone. It is sensing their pain, stress, or frustration. Compassion goes one step further. Compassion includes the desire and intention to help. Empathy feels. Compassion acts. Here's why that distinction matters. Pure empathy without boundaries can lead to emotional exhaustion. Leaders who absorb everyone's stress without perspective burn out quickly. Compassion, however, combines care with clarity. It says, "I understand your struggle, and I am going to respond in a way that truly supports you and the organization." This chapter is strong and mature because it acknowledges reality. Leadership involves difficult conversations, performance issues, conflict, even layoffs. And compassionate leadership does not avoid these realities. It approaches them wisely. Let's talk about tough conversations. Many leaders delay them because they want to be nice. Ironically, avoiding difficult feedback is not kind. It leaves people confused. It allows problems to grow. It damages team morale. Compassionate leadership means addressing issues directly but respectfully. Imagine an employee consistently missing deadlines. An ego-driven leader might respond with frustration. "Why can't you just get it together?" An overly empathetic but unclear leader might say nothing, hoping the issue resolves itself. A compassionate leader says, "I've noticed deadlines have been difficult to meet recently. Help me understand what's going on." That sentence does three things. It states the issue clearly, it invites dialogue, and it communicates care. Compassionate leadership balances accountability with understanding. It does not lower standards, it raises support. It asks, "How can I help you succeed?" while also saying, "This expectation still matters." Now let's address one of the hardest realities in business: layoffs. No leader enjoys letting someone go, but sometimes economic conditions, restructuring, or strategic shifts make it unavoidable. The difference between a traumatic experience and a dignified one often lies in how it is handled. Layoffs with dignity involve transparency, honesty, and humanity. It means not hiding behind generic emails or delegating the conversation entirely to HR. It means meeting face-to-face when possible, explaining the business rationale clearly, acknowledging the individual's contributions, and offering support, such as references or transition resources. Compassion does not eliminate the pain of a layoff, but it preserves dignity.
and dignity matters deeply. People may forget specific words, but they remember how they were treated. This is where the compassion and wisdom matrix becomes powerful. Imagine two axes, one for care, one for wisdom. High care with low wisdom can become indulgence. High wisdom with low care becomes cold efficiency. True compassionate leadership lives where both are strong. It is caring and clear, supportive and decisive, human and strategic. In practical terms, before making a major decision, ask yourself two questions. Is this decision aligned with long-term organizational health? And have I considered the human impact carefully? If the answer to both is yes, you are operating in the compassion-wisdom zone. Trust and loyalty are natural outcomes of this approach. When people believe their leader genuinely cares about them as human beings, they invest more emotionally in their work. Loyalty is not purchased. It is earned through consistent behavior. Think about leaders you've respected most in your career. Chances are they were not perfect. They may have made difficult decisions, but you sensed integrity, you sensed fairness, you sensed care. That combination builds enduring trust. Compassionate leadership also requires emotional regulation. If you enter tough conversations reactive or defensive, compassion disappears. Before addressing sensitive topics, pause, breathe, clarify your intention. The goal is not to win the conversation. The goal is to create clarity and growth. And here's something quietly powerful. Compassion strengthens performance culture. When people feel psychologically safe and valued, they are more willing to stretch, innovate, and admit mistakes. High-performing teams are not built on fear. They are built on trust. Now let's be honest. Compassion does not mean being soft all the time. Sometimes care requires firmness. Sometimes growth requires discomfort. A compassionate leader might say, "This behavior cannot continue," but they say it without humiliation, without sarcasm, without ego. Strength and kindness coexist. In daily practice, compassionate leadership can look like small acts, checking in on someone after a challenging presentation, remembering personal milestones, offering constructive feedback privately instead of publicly, asking, "What support do you need right now?" instead of assuming. And here's the empowering realization at the heart of this chapter. Compassion is not a weakness in leadership. It is a strategic advantage. It builds resilience. It builds culture. It builds loyalty. Organizations led with compassion and wisdom outperformed those driven solely by pressure. In a world where business can sometimes feel transactional and impersonal, compassionate leadership reintroduces humanity without sacrificing performance. It proves that you can be decisive and kind, accountable and understanding, strong and caring. When you lead with compassion guided with wisdom, people don't just follow you because of your title. They follow you because they trust you. And trust is the foundation of sustainable success. That's leadership at its most powerful. Care with clarity, heart with strength, humanity with purpose.
Every organization has a personality. You can feel it the moment you walk in. Some companies feel energized and open, where ideas move quickly and conversations are honest. Others feel tense, guarded, or overly political, where people measure their words carefully and meetings feel like quiet competitions. Chapter 10 of The Mind of the Leader, Understand Your Organization, invites you to step back from daily operations and observe something deeper, the organizational mind. Just as individuals have habits, beliefs, and automatic reactions, organizations do too. An organization thinks through its culture. It reacts through its systems. It behaves through its people. And if you want to lead at a higher level, you cannot just manage tasks and teams. You must understand the invisible patterns shaping collective behavior. The concept of the organizational mind is powerful because it shifts leadership from personal influence to systemic awareness. Every company develops shared assumptions over time. This is how we do things here. Don't challenge senior leadership. Move fast and break things. Avoid mistakes at all costs.
These phrases, spoken or unspoken, form the mental model of the organization. The challenge is that most leaders operate inside this culture without consciously examining it. It feels normal, but normal does not always mean healthy. If a culture rewards overwork and silently punishes boundaries, burnout becomes inevitable. If a culture values speed over reflection, mistakes multiply. The organizational mind shapes behavior long before formal policies do. Collective behaviors are simply repeated individual behaviors that become standard practice. For example, if leaders consistently respond to emails late at night, the implicit message becomes availability equals commitment. Soon, everyone follows, not because it is written in a handbook, but because behavior spreads. This is where cultural awareness becomes strategic. Instead of asking only, are we meeting our goals, mindful leaders ask, what behaviors are we reinforcing? Because what you tolerate, celebrate, and reward becomes culture. Cultural blind spots are especially dangerous. These are patterns that everyone participates in, but few recognize. For example, a leadership team might pride itself on being data-driven, yet consistently dismiss qualitative feedback from frontline employees. Or a company might claim to value innovation while punishing small failures harshly. These inconsistencies create disengagement. Blind spots exist because people become accustomed to their environment. It's like living next to a train track. Eventually, you stop noticing the noise. Leaders must intentionally step outside their own assumptions to see clearly. One practical way to uncover blind spots is to ask honest questions across levels of the organization. What behaviors here help you thrive? What behaviors make your work harder? If you were CEO for a day, what would you change? When leaders truly listen, patterns emerge. Engagement systems also play a crucial role in shaping culture. Engagement is not just about motivation. It's about the alignment between values, systems, and daily actions. For example, if performance reviews focus solely on financial metrics but ignore collaboration or well-being, employees quickly learn what truly matters. Systems communicate values much louder than speeches. If leaders talk about work-life balance but promote only those who sacrifice personal time, the real message is clear. Engagement systems must reflect stated values. That means integrating mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion into performance criteria, recognition programs, and leadership development. From a strategic perspective, cultural awareness means observing before acting. Instead of launching another initiative to fix morale, pause and examine existing behaviors. Are meetings dominated by a few voices? Are decisions transparent? Do employees feel safe raising concerns? Culture shifts when daily interactions shift. Consider a common scenario: a company struggling with low engagement scores. The initial reaction might be to introduce perks, free lunches, bonuses, new office furniture. But if the underlying issue is lack of trust or unclear communication, perks won't solve it. Culture cannot be bribed into health. That must be consciously cultivated. Humorously, some organizations try to solve deep cultural challenges with a motivational poster in the break room, as if a framed quote can override years of behavior. Culture does not change because of slogans. It changes because leaders consistently model new patterns. Practically, you can start by mapping your organizational habits. Notice how meetings begin and end. Observe how conflict is handled. Track how recognition is given. Ask yourself, if someone new joined today, what would they quickly learn about how we operate? Then, align systems intentionally. If collaboration is a core value, reward team achievements publicly. If innovation is important, create safe spaces for experimentation. If well-being matters, encourage sustainable workloads. The strategic power of this chapter lies in recognizing that culture is not abstract, it is operational. It influences hiring, retention, productivity, and reputation. High-performing organizations don't just manage strategy, they cultivate healthy collective minds. And here's the empowering truth: leaders shape culture whether they intend to or not. Every interaction, every decision, every response contributes to the organizational mind. The question is not whether you're influencing culture. The question is how consciously you are doing it. When leaders become observers of their own organizations, they gain clarity. When they align systems with values, they create coherence. When they address blind spots with humility, they build trust. An organization with a healthy mind operates with clarity, collaboration, and shared purpose. It becomes resilient under pressure because its foundation is strong.
And when culture supports engagement rather than undermines it, performance follows naturally. Understanding your organization is not about controlling every detail. It's about becoming aware of the patterns that shape everything else. When you see the culture clearly, you can lead it intentionally, and intentional culture creates sustainable success.
There is a silent cost inside most organizations that rarely appears on a balance sheet, yet it drains performance every single day. And that cost is distraction. Chapter 11 of The Mind of the Leader, Lead for a Mindful Organization, takes everything we have learned about personal focus and expands it into culture. Because it is one thing for a leader to be mindful individually, and it is another thing entirely to build an organization where focus becomes the norm rather than the exception. Think about the modern workplace for a moment. Slack notifications, endless email threads, back-to-back meetings, shifting priorities, urgent requests that replaced yesterday's urgent requests, and a constant sense that everyone is busy but not always productive. Many teams are not suffering from lack of talent, they are suffering from lack of focus. And this chapter addresses that problem directly. Reducing organizational distraction begins with recognizing that attention is a limited resource. Just as individuals have cognitive limits, organizations have collective attention limits. When everything is labeled as priority, nothing truly is. Leaders often unintentionally create distraction by launching too many initiatives at once. Slack decks multiply, goals expand, task lists grow longer, and teams stretch thinner. A mindful organization understands that clarity beats complexity. Instead of chasing 10 strategic goals, it chooses 3 and commits deeply. Instead of reacting to every market fluctuation, it responds deliberately. Focus becomes a discipline. Clear priorities are not just motivational slogans, they are operational decisions. They require saying no. And saying no is uncomfortable. It means declining opportunities that look attractive but do not align with core objectives. It means protecting teams from overload. It means accepting that progress in one direction requires restraint in others. In practical terms, clear priorities involve defining what truly matters this quarter, this month, even this week. Leaders must communicate not only what to do, but what not to do. Without that clarity, teams waste energy on low-impact tasks while high-impact work gets delayed. Meeting culture transformation is another powerful theme in this chapter. If you want to diagnose organizational distraction, simply analyze how meetings are conducted. Are they focused? Do they start and end on time? Is there a clear agenda? Or do they drift into tangents, extend beyond scheduled time, and conclude without decisions? Many organizations treat meetings as default settings rather than intentional tools. Yet meetings consume enormous amounts of collective attention. A mindful organization treats attention as currency. If you would not waste financial resources carelessly, why waste cognitive resources? Transforming meeting culture can begin with simple but disciplined changes. Require a clear purpose for every meeting. Clarify desired outcomes in advance. Invite only necessary participants. Begin with a brief moment of focus. Just 30 seconds of quiet breathing to reset attention. It may sound unusual at first, but it dramatically improves quality of discussion. Another effective practice is ending meetings with explicit next steps. Who is responsible? What is the deadline? Ambiguity creates follow-up meetings. Clarity reduces them. Attention as organizational currency is perhaps the most strategic idea in this chapter. Wherever attention flows, energy follows. And wherever energy flows, results follow. If leadership attention constantly shifts to short-term crises, long-term strategy suffers. If leaders focus only on performance metrics and ignore culture, engagement declines. Mindful organizations deliberately allocate attention. They protect time for deep work. They reduce unnecessary interruptions. They establish norms around communication, such as limiting after-hours emails or setting response time expectations. Consider a common scenario. An employee working on a high-priority project receives multiple quick questions throughout the day. Each interruption may seem small, but collectively they fragment focus. Research shows that it takes significant time to regain full concentration after being interrupted. Multiply that across an organization, and the productivity loss becomes enormous. Creating a focused culture means designing systems that minimize unnecessary interruptions. For example, designating specific collaboration windows, encouraging asynchronous communication when possible, and discouraging multitasking during important conversations. Leaders must model this behavior. If a leader checks their phone during meetings, others will follow. If a leader sends emails at midnight and expects instant replies, distraction becomes normalized. Mindfulness at the organizational level begins with leadership example. This chapter is practical because it emphasizes structure, not just intention. Culture changes through consistent behavioral patterns. If you want a mindful organization, build rituals that reinforce focus. Weekly priority alignment sessions, monthly reflection meetings to evaluate progress, clear communication channels that reduce noise. And, yes, sometimes humor helps. You may have attended a meeting that felt like it could have been an email, or worse, a meeting to plan another meeting. A mindful organization asks, is this the best use of collective attention? That question alone can eliminate inefficiency. The efficient truth here is that focus is not restrictive, it is liberating. When priorities are clear, people feel less anxious. When meetings are purposeful, time feels respected. When attention is protected, quality improves. The emotional uplift at the heart of this chapter is this. You can create a culture where people feel calm and productive rather than overwhelmed and reactive. You can build an environment where deep work is possible. You can design systems that support clarity instead of chaos. A mindful organization does not eliminate urgency, but it handles urgency intelligently. It does not avoid complexity, but it manages complexity with intention. It understands that attention is the foundation of execution. When leaders treat attention as a precious asset, they elevate performance naturally. And when focus becomes part of culture, excellence becomes sustainable. That is the power of leading for a mindful organization.
There is something powerful that happens when an organization stops asking, how does my department win? And starts asking, how do we win together? Chapter 12 of The Mind of the Leader, Lead for a Selfless Organization, expands the idea of selfless leadership beyond individuals and into systems. Because it is one thing for a single leader to operate without ego, and it is another thing entirely to build a culture where collaboration replaces competition, where shared success matters more than personal territory, and where leadership extends beyond hierarchy. Most organizations, even well-intentioned ones, struggle with silos. Marketing optimizes for marketing metrics. Sales optimizes for sales targets. Operations optimizes for efficiency. Finance optimizes for cost control. Each function performs well individually, yet collectively friction grows. Information is guarded, credit is claimed locally, blame is shifted across departments. It is almost as if the company becomes a collection of mini kingdoms. Silos are rarely created by bad people. They are created by misaligned incentives. When performance reviews and bonuses are tied exclusively to departmental results, collaboration becomes optional. And optional collaboration often fades under pressure. A selfless organization challenges that design. It asks whether the structure itself encourages service to the whole rather than protection of the part. Shared success becomes the new measure. Instead of celebrating only individual or departmental wins, the organization highlights cross-functional achievements. Imagine a product launch. Instead of praising only the sales team for strong revenue, leadership publicly recognizes the collaboration between product development, marketing, operations, and customer support. The narrative shifts from who closed the deal to who contributed to the outcome. That shift influences behavior. People begin to see themselves as contributors to a larger mission rather than competitors for recognition. Service-based structures are central to this chapter. Structure shapes behavior. If reporting lines reinforce hierarchy too rigidly, communication narrows. If decision-making authority is centralized excessively, innovation slows. A selfless organization designs systems where departments exist to serve one another. For example, instead of viewing HR as a compliance unit, it can be framed as a partner enabling team growth. Instead of IT being seen as a help desk, it becomes a strategic enabler of productivity. Language matters.
When departments see their role as service-based, cooperation increases naturally. Collective accountability also transforms culture. In many organizations, accountability is individual and sometimes punitive. Who made the mistake becomes the dominant question. In a selfless organization, accountability expands to what system allowed this outcome. This does not remove personal responsibility, but it adds systemic reflection. When a project fails, instead of searching for someone to blame, leaders examine communication gaps, unclear priorities, or resource constraints. This builds trust. Teams become more willing to take calculated risks because they know failure will be analyzed constructively rather than weaponized. Leadership beyond hierarchy is perhaps the most visionary idea in this chapter. Titles matter for clarity and governance, but influence does not belong exclusively to those at the top. In a selfless organization, leadership is a behavior, not a position. Anyone who takes initiative, supports others, and contributes solutions demonstrates leadership. This approach increases engagement. When employees feel their voice matters regardless of title, participation rises. Innovation becomes distributed rather than centralized. The organization becomes more adaptive. Practically, how do you build a collaborative culture? Start by aligning incentives with shared outcomes. Introduce cross-functional goals. Encourage joint problem-solving sessions. Rotate leadership roles within projects so different voices gain visibility. Another powerful practice is cross-departmental learning. Invite teams to present not only successes but also challenges to other functions. Transparency reduces misunderstanding. When marketing understands operational constraints and operations understands customer expectations, empathy grows. Humor often reveals truth. Many organizations joke about that department being difficult. Those jokes signal underlying tension. A selfless organization replaces stereotypes with dialogue. It asks, what pressures are they facing? Curiosity replaces criticism. Leaders must model this behavior. If senior executives compete internally for influence or recognition, that pattern cascades downward. If they publicly support one another and share credit, collaboration strengthens. The visionary beauty of this chapter is that a selfless organization becomes resilient. When market conditions shift or crises emerge, teams that already collaborate adapt faster. They trust one another. They communicate openly. They focus on collective solutions rather than protecting turf. And here is the empowering truth. Collaborative culture is not soft. It is strategically intelligent. Silos waste resources. Competition inside the organization drains energy that should be directed outward toward customers and innovation. Selfless organizations conserve energy by aligning around purpose. When service replaces ego, when shared success replaces isolated wins, and when leadership expands beyond hierarchy, the organization becomes greater than the sum of its parts. People feel connected to something larger than their job description. In the end, leading for a selfless organization means designing systems where everyone asks, how can I help us succeed? Instead of, how can I look successful? That server shift changes everything. It creates unity without eliminating individuality. It builds strength without breeding rivalry. And when collaboration becomes culture, extraordinary performance is no longer accidental. It becomes inevitable.
There's a question that defines the future of leadership, and it is this: can an organization perform at a high level without sacrificing its humanity? Chapter 13 of The Mind of the Leader, Lead for a Compassionate Organization, answers with a confident yes. But only if compassion is woven into the systems, decisions, and culture of the company itself. This chapter is not about being nice for appearance's sake. It is about building sustainable performance through care, trust, and long-term thinking. For decades, many organizations operated under an unspoken trade-off: performance or people, results or relationships, profit or well-being.
But this chapter challenges that outdated mindset. It argues that the most progressive, purpose-driven companies understand that balancing performance with humanity is not a compromise. It is a multiplier. Balancing performance with humanity begins by redefining what success looks like. Short-term financial gains achieved through burnout, fear, or constant pressure are not sustainable. Eventually, disengagement rises, turnover increases, innovation slows, and the hidden costs surface. Sustainable performance requires healthy people. A compassionate organization sets ambitious goals, but it also builds support systems that enable employees to reach them without chronic exhaustion. It recognizes that human beings are not machines. They need recovery, clarity, and meaning. And interestingly, when people feel cared for, they often exceed expectations willingly. This is where trust-based systems become critical. Trust is not built through speeches about values. It is built through consistent behavior. Policies, communication patterns, and leadership actions must align with stated principles. For example, if an organization claims to value work-life balance but consistently rewards those who sacrifice personal time, trust erodes. On the other hand, when leaders openly model boundaries, taking vacations, logging off at reasonable hours, encouraging flexibility, trust strengthens. Employees feel safe making sustainable choices. Trust-based systems also involve transparency. When leadership communicates openly about challenges, financial realities, and strategic decisions, uncertainty decreases. People can handle difficult truths more easily than they can handle silence. Silence creates rumors. Transparency builds stability. Compassionate organizations also invest in development rather than treating employees as expendable resources. Training, mentorship, coaching, these are not expenses, they are long-term investments. When employees see that the organization is committed to their growth, loyalty increases. Long-term success requires resisting short-term temptations. It's easy to cut development budgets during tough times. It's easy to increase pressure when targets are missed. But progressive leaders ask, what will this decision do to our culture 5 years from now? That long-term lens protects resilience. Organizational resilience is perhaps the strongest outcome of compassionate leadership at scale. Resilience is the ability to adapt, recover, and grow stronger under stress. Companies with high trust and strong relationships respond to crises more effectively. Teams collaborate rather than fragment. Communication remains open rather than defensive. Think about how organizations respond during economic downturns or unexpected disruptions. In low-trust cultures, fear spreads quickly. People protect themselves. Innovation freezes. In compassionate organizations, leaders acknowledge reality honestly while reinforcing collective purpose. Employees rally because they feel included, not controlled. Humor sometimes reveals the contrast. Some workplaces operate on what could be called emergency mode as a lifestyle, where everything is urgent, everyone is stressed, and calm feels suspicious. A compassionate organization does not eliminate urgency, but it avoids glorifying constant crisis. It builds steady rhythms. Practically, how do you lead for a compassionate organization? Begin by evaluating systems through a human lens. Review performance metrics. Do they reward collaboration or only individual competition? Examine communication norms. Are employees encouraged to speak up without fear? Assess workload distribution. Is burnout normalized or addressed? Introduce regular well-being check-ins alongside performance reviews. Encourage leaders at every level to develop emotional intelligence. Create forums where employees can share share ideas and concerns safely. Small structural adjustments can have large cultural impact. Another powerful practice is recognizing effort and values-driven behavior, not just outcomes. Celebrate teamwork, highlight acts of integrity, reinforce the behaviors that strengthen culture. Recognition shapes identity. This chapter ultimately connects compassion with purpose. When organizations align around a meaningful mission, performance gains depth. People are not just completing tasks, they are contributing to something that matters. Purpose fuels resilience. The empowering truth here is that compassionate organizations are not fragile. They are strong in a different way. They combine ambition with empathy, discipline with dignity, strategy with care, and that combination creates endurance. In a competitive global marketplace, sustainable performance is the true advantage. Talent retention, innovation, adaptability, these emerge from cultures where people feel respected and valued. When employees trust leadership and believe their well-being matters, discretionary effort increases naturally. Leading for a compassionate organization means designing a system where humanity and high performance reinforce each other, rather than compete. It means recognizing that culture is not a side project. It is the engine of long-term success. And when leaders commit to this balance, they build organizations that do more than hit quarterly targets. They build institutions that people are proud to belong to, resilient in adversity, and capable of thriving for decades. That is sustainable performance. That is progressive leadership. And that is the legacy of a compassionate organization.
The world does not need more titles, louder voices, or sharper strategies. It needs leaders who understand their own minds. As we reach the conclusion of the mind of the leader, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. The future of leadership is human, not mechanical, not ego-driven, not fueled by pressure alone. Human. We are stepping into a future that is faster, more complex, and more unpredictable than anything previous generations faced. Artificial intelligence is advancing. Markets are volatile. Employees demand meaning over money, and attention spans are shrinking by the swipe. In a hard future like this, technical skills will not be enough. Strategy alone will not be enough. What will matter most is the strength of your inner leadership. The book has taken us on a journey inward before outward. It has shown that leadership does not begin with managing others, building culture decks, or launching engagement surveys. It begins in the mind, because if you cannot manage your own attention, ego, and emotions, how can you expect to guide others through uncertainty? This is where MSC leadership, mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion becomes more than a framework. It becomes a daily discipline. Mindfulness is not just meditation. It is the ability to pay attention in a world designed to steal it. In a culture where meetings overlap, notifications buzz, and multitasking is celebrated, attention is currency. A mindful leader brings clarity where there is chaos. Instead of reacting impulsively, they pause. That 1-second gap we talked about throughout this journey, that pause becomes power. It becomes the difference between escalating conflict and creating understanding, between sending a reactive email and crafting a thoughtful response, between burning out and building resilience. Selflessness is not weakness. It is ego management. It is understanding that leadership is not about proving how smart you are, but about enabling others to succeed. The future demands collaboration across silos, across cultures, across continents. An ego that needs constant validation cannot build collective success. A selfless leader asks, "How can I serve?" instead of "How can I win?" And ironically, that mindset builds stronger results. Compassion is not softness. It is strength guided by wisdom. The workplaces of tomorrow require trust, and trust grows when people feel seen, heard, and valued. Compassion does not mean avoiding tough decisions. It means making them with dignity. It means giving honest feedback with respect. It means laying someone off, if necessary, with humanity rather than indifference. Compassion plus wisdom is sustainable leadership. Now, here's the practical truth. MSC is not a personality trait reserved for monks or saints. It is practice, daily practice. You practice mindfulness by protecting moments of focused attention. You practice selflessness by passing credit publicly and taking responsibility privately. You practice compassion by checking your intention before entering a difficult conversation. You practice leadership by managing your own mind before managing your team. Leadership, ultimately, is responsibility. Not responsibility for controlling everything, because that's impossible, but responsibility for how you show up. Responsibility for the emotional climate you create in a meeting. Responsibility for the culture you reinforce with every decision. Responsibility for whether people leave interactions with you feeling smaller or stronger. Think about a simple scenario. A team member makes a mistake that costs the company money. The ego-driven response is frustration. The mindful response is pause. The compassionate response is curiosity. What happened? What can we learn? That moment defines culture. That moment defines leadership. And those moments happen every single day. The future will test leaders. Economic downturns will come. Disruption will accelerate. Expectations will rise. But the leaders who cultivate inner clarity, humility, and care will not only survive, they will build organizations where people thrive. If there's one lasting message from this journey, it's this: lead yourself first. Lead yourself with awareness. Notice your thoughts before they control you. Notice your biases before they guide your decisions. Notice your stress before it spills onto others. Lead with humility. Remember that your title does not make you valuable, your behavior does. Your willingness to listen does. Your ability to admit mistakes does. Lead with compassion. Care about performance, yes, but care equally about people. Balance ambition with humanity. And most importantly, remember that leadership is not a destination, it is a practice. Every meeting, every email, every conversation, every pause. If this summary of the mind of the leader has sparked something in you, if it made you reflect, question, or feel inspired, then take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who leads or aspires to lead, and subscribe to Cliff Note Chronicles so we can continue growing together. Because leadership is not a solo journey, it is a shared responsibility. The future does not belong to the loudest leader in the room. It belongs to the most aware, the most grounded, the most compassionate. And that leader can be you.